Hello everyone. This is the first video from the CPING network. This one will involve the proper way to sample from a herbarium specimen. Now, the first and most important step in sampling from herbarium tissue is obtaining permission from the institution that has the specimens. Sometimes you may be sampling from your own material at your institution if you're the curator of the herbarium, but otherwise you need to obtain permission from that collection in order to sample from museum material, and often fill out a destructive sampling permission form. Once you have obtained permission to sample from a specimen, you should know approximately how much material you want to take. Now, this is usually going to be around 15 milligrams. The amount of tissue will vary based on the taxon, and this is something that you should consult with the person, the end user of the material. They'll give you a sense of approximately how much material that is. So you've identified a specimen you want to sample from. This specimen is ideal in many ways. There's only a single stem here. There's ample material. Taking material from this specimen won't damage it scientifically. You'll notice that there's multiple things here on the sheet. First of all, there's this main label that shows when it was collected, where it was collected, who the original collector was, and what their identification was. Then there's also subsequent annotation labels that show either a later collector or a later identifier confirmed that original identification or maybe changed it. In this case, a later identifier viewed this as Solidago almifolia. So we've identified this specimen. We want to sample from it. I like to use these sharp-pointed forceps. They're really great for sampling material. I'm going to remove about half of one of these main leaves, which is approximately the amount of material that will give me 10 to 15 milligrams from this specimen. So I'll remove that material and place it in this coin envelope. You'll notice that I'm sampling from a single leaf. That's ideal if possible. That means that you know you're only sampling a single genotype. It's critical on these sheets, if there's more than a single stem present, to only sample from a single stem so we're not mixing up potentially different genotypes. Some specimens will also feature fragment packets. Fragment packets are a last option. The CPING network prefers that you sample from the actual material mounted to the sheet. That way, that ensures the link between that phenotype on the sheet and the genotype that you're going to get from the DNA. This packet here contains information that I gleaned from the label, specifically taxon, collector and number, herbarium, and your name. And it's critical that this information is on every one of these coin envelopes that you sample from. Once you've sampled from a coin envelope, you can close it in a variety of ways. You can either lick it and use the glue on the back, or if you're not interested in that, you can close it with a regular paper clip. And then store it in a bag with silica gel until you can work with it or send it to your CPING hub collaborator. The last thing that you want to do after you sampled from a specimen is add an annotation label. This annotation label includes information on the taxon, what your identification was, and who you are, which institution you represent, and also information about the CPING award itself. I like to add annotation labels as close as I can to other annotation labels, and in this case, I would glue this down right next to this earlier annotation label. These labels will be provided to you by the CPING network, either as a Word file or as paper labels. If you print your own labels, remember that this annotation label needs to be printed on acid-free paper. The last thing you want to do before moving on to the next specimen is to make sure to clean the forceps so we're not transferring small amounts of leaf tissue between collection efforts. This is as easy as adding a little bit of ethanol to a chem wipe and then forcefully wiping the forceps and drying them. After you've sampled from a specimen, you need to add information from that specimen and from all the specimens you work with to a sampling spreadsheet that CPING will supply you. Here on this first row is column information. For several of them, there's a little red triangle which has some self-explanatory information for individual columns. The first column is pretty explanatory. This is the label ID, which was the species identification on the original label. who did that identification. In the case of our specimen, it was the original collector, Stuart Lassiter, although sometimes other people provided that primary identification on the label. There are often additional annotations on that specimen. In this case, there was one. In this case, I was the first annotator to that specimen, and I supplied a new identification, Solidago ulmifolia. If there are additional annotators, you can add them next. Then you want to add your identification as the sampler, the identification that you made for that specimen. And then the next thing you want to put in is why you made that. What were the diagnostic characters that you used for that identification? Additional columns include the herbarium where you sample the material from. Any notes about your sampling. Did it come from a fragment packet? Did it come from the stem? Was there glue on the tissue? That kind of thing. One of the most important things you're going to add is the collector and their number. This is absolutely critical because if you remember, the collector and the number is the most unambiguous link between the information on this spreadsheet, the information in your coin envelope, and the information on the sheet itself. The next column is database source. If this specimen is part of a collection that has been digitized, often all of the information on this line will be in another database, such as Tropicos or Cernec or iDigBio. If that's the case, you can note that database here, and then the rest of the information on the line you can then add later on your own, and that'll save you time in the herbarium. So, for instance, I know this specimen is at Cernec, so I can note that here in this field, and then I can leave the rest of the information blank. However, for purposes of explanation, here note that I've added month, day, and year that it was collected. This would actually say USA for country, state, province, locality, and then if there was provided latitude on the specimen, meaning there was, the user had actually provided an original latitude, you can add that. And then finally, any other notes about the specimen that you would like to add. I typically like to sample from a specimen and then add the information immediately. It kind of breaks the tediousness of it up to sample, then add information. Or you can sample from a stack of specimens and then add the information later. But at any rate, the coin envelopes and this spreadsheet should reflect the same information, and both of which will be transmitted to your hub collaborator. Thank you.